Hello everyone, welcome to the first video on my channel by Book and Bone. I know I'm a little later with the favourites of 2021 than most other booktubers, and this is probably an odd first video to do, but if I didn't force myself to get a video out, I just never post a video ever. If you're visiting from Instagram, you might know that I kept track of my favourite book from each month last year. Well, that's pretty much what this video is going to be, but more. Instagram can be just a bit stifling when it comes to reviews and recommending books. So after I've gone through 12 books for the 12 months, I'll tell you which book was the best of the year because I think it's one that I think everyone should at least try. So without further ado, so The Island of Sea Women is equal parts a fascinating look into a culture throughout the 20th century and an intimate character study of two women. Lisa C does this fantastic job of portraying Jeju and the Haenyeo from South Korea, as well as shining a light on the oppression and atrocities committed upon them. It's difficult to fully put into words how well Young Suk and Mija's relationship were intertwined with the history of Jeju and the events that rend them apart. You can really see how each woman was shaped by the treatment she received from childhood and how much these differences caused them to grow into the completely different people and cause them to lead completely different lives. The book is from Young Suk's point of view, and because of this, Lisa C was able to create a sympathetic but slightly unreliable narrator, and she did it really effectively. Like Young Suk does not lie or anything, but like any of us, she's not privy to Mija's reasoning, and though she could see how Mija was treated as a girl, she didn't experience it. So there was events that she didn't see, so she is making a conclusion based on the limited knowledge she had. When it comes to South Korea itself, its history and culture, I must admit to knowing very, very little. There's this sort of sense that South Korea is the good guy historically, and now we have K-pop, and that's really all I've been exposed to without researching. Lisa C does not hold back when exploring the atrocities done to Jeju by their own people. Um, and this book had me in tears so many times, and I couldn't help but recognize the similarities between um, South Korea and some of my own country's history when it came to what people are willing to do to each other. Skip the next 10 seconds if you don't want to be spoiled for the tone of the ending. The Island of Sea Women, it has a bittersweet ending, emphasis on the bitter. It's I cried solidly reading the last few pages. It's heartbreaking. Overall, uh, this is a great book. It was fantastic for the beginning of 2021, and just talking about it really makes me want to read it again. I might read a non-fiction about the Haenyeo though instead. As a woman from a fishing community and a semi-retired fisher myself, I want to know everything I can about Jeju. Rebecca is a brilliant February read. When especially if you're from Ireland and it's one of the coldest months of the year, and it's that little bit of extra depressing in the middle of winter, just at the end of it. So I was completely hooked from page one. The heroine's insecurity and general sympathetic demeanor juxtaposed uh, with the grandeur of Manderley and just the coldness of this huge house is fantastically done. The tension starts building even before the newly married couple arrive home, and I'm sure we can all understand how you would be almost driven mad by everyone comparing you to your husband's dead wife, particularly when one of his staff is trying to ruin your life at the same time. I found the narrator really sympathetic and completely understood how she presumed all the comparisons to Rebecca were in Rebecca's favour. I think we all kind of do that a lot, when in fact, many of the characters didn't even like Rebecca and were too polite to badmouth the dead. The characters were really, really good. I found B was a great character, as was Clarice, Mrs. Danvers. Actually, most of the female characters were as fleshed out, often more so than the male characters, and that's really good to read. It's quite refreshing to see in a classic, outside obviously of the Bronte sisters. And uh, I wasn't a huge fan of Maxim, is the husband. he's older, so like, why is he such a dramatic baby? Like, okay, I know why. That's you find out, but it's just, ugh, he's a complete idiot. I kept hoping that the heroine would get a name at the end when she gains that self confidence and steps out from beneath Rebecca's shadow. Unfortunately, she doesn't. You're left kind of frantically trying to figure out who's safe in the end. I hope everyone's heard of the Ghibli movie, Howl's Moving Castle. It's wonderful, and I watched that long before I read this book, and I'd wanted to read this book for years. Finally got around to it last year. So, as someone who already enjoyed the movie, I have to say that the book was actually better. I know. I adored it. It's so whimsical and it's different. Like it has a lot of similarities with maybe other kind of whimsical satirical um fantasy books, but it's just really, really wholesome almost. There's a lot more characters than in the movie, and if I'm honest, I really kind of liked the story more in the book. There's a lot more detail, and the characters are more lovable, and it's just much better put together. Sophie is one of my new favorite protagonists of all time. I love that she's like so shy and afraid, uh, but then she's turned elderly by the witch, and she's just like, "Well, that can't get any worse. Shut up, Howell. I live in your kitchen now." And she just becomes this boss ass bitch. I laughed out loud several times. Calcifer is great too, exactly how I'd imagine a small fire demon. Howl is hilarious in the books. He's so dramatic about the littlest things, and they're like, I really recommend the audiobook. That's how I read it with. Uh, the His Welsh accent is fantastic. It actually gives so much more to the character. No offense to the actor of the movie. It's just a really fun time, and put me in a great mood 3 days running, which is why it was the best. Next we have April. I read House of Hollow. This was a an ARC copy given to me, and I think it's probably the best ARC copy I've gotten. I was so happy to get it. It's this kind of horror YA, which incorporates fashion, and it has that kind of eldritch, little bit of eldritch horror, a little bit of fey horror. It's really, really good. I think I'm a little bit in shock about how perfect this book lines up with what I wanted from it. It's this dark, twisted fairy tale with two mysteries, like where is the eldest sister, Grey? What happened to the three sisters when they were missing as children? Early on, I had some theories and was delighted to find out that I was partially right, only that it was much darker than I thought. Which is, I like books that you can kind of, if you work at it, you may be able to figure out part of the truth. But I like it even better when you're still a bit wrong. Without giving any spoilers, I can say that this is the best representation of my favorite concept from like my local folklore. So I said no spoilers, so I have to leave it that vague. But you know, it's definitely these are the fairy tales I grew up with. I love Grey's style, but very quickly concluded that she's just an awful person. It was a bit frustrating actually that Iris couldn't see it. That's our main character. I was on the fence about their mother too, but to be fair, she wasn't as bad. She wasn't so bad that you couldn't understand how she acted, considering like this really sad history. I adore Iris and Vivi. They feel like sisters with a healthy relationship, but they're complete characters with their own goals. They obviously love each other, and it's not perfect, but very real feeling. I'd love to read more within the universe, but I also feel like the main part of these character stories is done. I hope that if there is a sequel, it's from a different character's perspective. May was the Gilded Ones. I think the Gilded Ones might be one of the best young adult novels that I have ever read. It's one of my favorite YAs. I read a lot of good YAs in 2021, and it really reinvigorated the kind of age group for me, because I found myself reading a lot of adult or middle grade and just skipping YA altogether. But last year has really turned that around. Compared to a lot of the YA I'd read up until this year, the subject matter presented in the Gilded Ones is both generally more grave and also treated with the respect that gravity deserves. I was immediately drawn to Decca, the protagonist, and her initial want to fit in with the extreme patriarchal society she was born into. It broke my heart to see what she was willing to accept, like this enormous amount of abuse, because that's what she was taught, so she doesn't see it as wrong. It's really horror. It's really, really realistic in that regard, and horrible. I can see this being a difficult read for some people because of that. I love how the author manages to depict this new fantasy world without being overly descriptive. It's just the perfect amount of imagery for this story as the first in a series. Truly, I could gush about so many aspects of this book, but I'd end up spoiling it. There's one tiny spoiler incoming because I loved it so much, and it's one of the things that kind of made this such a good book to me. There's this really chaste romance in the Gilded Ones. Chaste is a terrible word, but that's what it is. I normally hate romances in YA because they're so dramatic, and sometimes I feel like a creep because, look, I'm an adult. I don't want to read about teens lusting after each other. However, in this case, it actually feels like a real young, like a teenage romance, especially in this sort of chaste society. I really loved it. I loved how it was represented. I thought the author did a great job with it. Instagram made me buy this book, and I regret nothing. It really didn't disappoint. I really connected with Soraya and her story. She suffered an awful amount of emotional abuse under the guise of protection, and even though her mother thought she was doing the right thing, that it was abuse. The world building is fantastically intricate, but like the Gilded Ones, it doesn't bog you down with details. Um, Gulvahar and the surrounding lands and the mythology in this book are based on Persian mythology, and I think Melissa did a wonderful job incorporating the culture into this almost like fairy story. There's the trope where the protagonist was lied to their entire life, so they make a bad choice, like which I both hate and I also find really cathartic because I see it so much in real life. Like I absolutely hate when guardians lie to children or people in their care to like spare them. It's never what happens in reality. It's never the truth. It's you're sparing yourself having a tough talk, and it always goes badly. Obviously, in real life, the consequences don't usually include divs or magic, but metaphors will metaphor. As I'm sure you've guessed from the title, in editing I realised this video is twice as long as I wanted it to be, so I've broken it into two parts. Part 2 will be out tomorrow, and in the meantime, have you read any of these books? Let me know in the comments what were the best books you thought in 2021. Let me know in the comments if you hated this video, if you liked this video. Give me a like, yell at me, I don't mind.